So to actually deny our emotions is to deny our humanity. It's to deny how God created us in his image and likeness. I think, again, there is this mindset in Christian masculinity that emotion is somehow inferior and is ungodly. And it's honestly, I think it's a deception. I think it's a lie from the enemy.
All right, welcome back to the Men Talking Podcast. My name's Dana. Happy to have you here. I'm here alongside my friend Ken. And today we have another super interesting topic. Not one most guys really want to get into, not one that most guys want to talk about, but we're going to get into the sort of the process of emotional pain and what does that look like for men specifically. Most of us would look at emotional pain, think about emotional pain, and kind of go, I don't know what you're talking about. You know, whether we play dumb or whether we just don't want to deal with it or whether we refuse to maybe even acknowledge its existence. It's an interesting topic for sure. You know, when you ask most men, what are you feeling? You know, sometimes it's literally like a cow staring at a new gate and they're like, I don't know about that. So today, let's dive into that a little bit and kind of tread the waters a little bit of emotional pain. And if you're new to this, just I would invite that you hang in there with us for a minute and give us a chance to kind of talk this through and give Ken a chance to explain some of his side of what we're looking at, because there is a lot of truth in emotional pain that comes out of it. And I think that it's all part of the journey, you know, but I also understand people's nervousness to go, oh, well, you know, I don't need to dive into those waters, you know, like what is that resistance, I guess?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, our last episode, we talked about the complicated relationship that men have with physical pain. I think it's even more complicated when we talk about emotional pain. I think men are willing to talk about their work, the sports, you know, their hobbies. But when it comes to asking them how they feel, they just kind of have this, like you said, this kind of deer in the headlight look. They don't know how they feel. Most men are familiar with anger and happiness. That's kind of the two categories, right? We got to polarize between those two extremes. The truth is, emotions are like a dashboard. It's like the dashboard on your car. If your oil light goes off and you ignore it, that's going to be bad and not very good. You know, it's going to be a short amount of time. Just a couple of weeks ago, I turned my blinker on and started blinking really, really, really fast, right? So now we know that one of my bulbs is out.
Yeah.
But if I didn't have that indicator, I wouldn't have known because the light's behind me. I wouldn't have had any idea. And so to ignore our emotions is to really ignore what is going on in our hearts. Emotions, and we're going to talk about the 8 core emotions that Chip Dodd refers to in his book, The Voice of the Heart, act like windows into the heart. If you want to know what's truly going on in your heart, you have to be a student of these 8 core emotions.
You know, it's interesting as you say that, it kind of makes me think about when I was sort of starting my journey in this idea of the heart, you know, and what is that in men that when you talk about the heart, they resist? It's like this, hold up. You know what I mean? There's this facade that we want to put on, that we want to deny its existence, that it's kind of like, no, stoicism is my thing. I don't venture down that road. Why so much resistance from us? Is it the way we're raised? Is it, were we hurt when we were younger? Is it like, what kind of stops that? What causes us to have that? I mean, I know for myself, having done the work, but what is that in men?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things that I think fit into this category, Dana. One is we have a cultural bias against emotions for men, that if you allow yourself to be emotional, to cry, to feel sadness, to feel hurt, you're somehow less of a man. So I definitely think that's embedded into our culture. And it's not exclusively for men, right? I think women have their own struggles in that regard as well. But we have a definition of masculinity that does not allow for emotion. Number 2, we're just not, from a biblical worldview, from a Christian perspective, we don't have a good theology for emotion. If you have emotion, then there's something wrong with you. It's some kind of weakness, lack of faith. I mean, we talked a little bit about this last time. But what I think validates our emotions more than anything else is this: God is an emotional being.
Hmm.
If you doubt that, you haven't read the Old Testament lately. Over and over and over again, God is talking about Israel as his bride and he as the husband. And that when they were worshiping other gods, that they were whoring themselves after these other gods, that's why idolatry was such a big deal. That it was this misplacement of relationship, in part. And so we have a relational God, and he made us in his image and likeness. And part of what that means is that we are emotional beings. So to actually deny our emotions is to deny our humanity. It's to deny how God created us in his image and likeness. So I really think we need to have a much more robust understanding of emotion, as well as a biblical theology for it.
Would you say that emotions are, we talk about the dashboard light, and there's so many sort of analogies I kind of love that come up with that. Like sometimes it's a check engine light, no idea what that one is.
Yeah.
You have no idea, but then sometimes it's like I'm low on windshield washer fluid. It's easy. But would you say that emotions are not necessarily the roadmap, but maybe they would be considered, beacons along the way? Or would you, because I know that a lot of people will come and say, oh, well, emotions they can't be the driving force.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I'm not advocating that. I'm not suggesting that we let emotions dictate.
Yeah.
But I do think that we need to pay attention to them. So, right, there's a difference. And again, if we are hiding from our emotions, suppressing our emotions, denying our emotions, whatever verbiage you want to use, we're actually not walking with integrity. We're not walking in the light of what is truly going on. And that's where I think understanding the 8 core emotions really gives us a glimpse into what is truly going on in the heart. Chip says that these 8 core emotions are the language of the heart. So when you know that anxiety is not your issue, the core issue is fear. When you're trying to explore an emotion of like anxiety, it's like, gosh, why am I feeling so anxious today? That's going to take you down one path. But if you then understand that, well, wait a second, the core of anxiety is fear. So what actually am I afraid of? That's going to take you down a whole different path. So it helps us to align. Understanding these 8 core emotions helps us to align with what is truly going on in the heart. So in that sense, yes, they are light posts. Because they reveal what's happening on the inside. And again, Proverbs 4:23 says to guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life. I mean, the heart, which is not the physical muscle that's beating in our chest, obviously, it's our inner being, our inmost being. We'll talk more about that in future episodes. But the word heart is used over 1,000 times in Scripture. And there's 3 primary dynamics of the heart. I talk about this in my book, Unhindered Abundance. There's thought, emotion, and will. Our will is our desires. You could think of it as desire. And I liken those to 3 gears that are turning in a transmission. And when one turns, it influences and affects the other. Mm-hmm. So emotion, when there's lots of places in Scripture where emotion is referring to a dynamic of the heart, as is our thinking, as is our choosing, our will, our desires.
Right. So, okay. So let's say we get down the road of life a little ways and you decide, you know what? I'm just going to ignore it. I don't care. I don't care, Dana. I don't care what you say, Ken. I don't care what you say. Life is good. I'm not opening that box of chocolates. I want nothing to do. What happens? What happens to us when we start to suppress these emotions? I know specifically for me, when I did this in my 30s, that so much of what happened, or even late 20s, I started learning that if I didn't acknowledge these things, and if I didn't, as Andy Stanley would say, pay attention to the tension, I became angry and depressed. Because much like we've talked about, I would basically, what happens when you hold the door closed in the river of emotion that is coming at you, and you live one life over here and you are holding life up by the door here to hide the emotion? What happens to us?
Yeah, well, that's actually a good analogy. So if you think about holding your hand on a closet door that's full of emotion that you don't want to address, just think about how much energy it's taking you to keep that door closed,
Yeah.
that you could be redirecting into other things in your life. So part of what suppressed emotions do is it robs you of that extra energy because you have to suppress it. Often men use anger to suppress emotions that are more depleting, like sadness, hurt, and loneliness. Right? Those are three
Is
core
that because you can
emotions.
control anger?
It makes you yes, it makes anger makes you feel like you have some control, you have
Yeah.
some agency,
Yeah.
and it's an empowering emotion.
Yeah.
Right? Where sadness, hurt, and loneliness, those are disempowering emotions. Those are things that feel kind of depressive. So suppressing those emotions is going to it's going to drain the battery.
Well, so we talked a little bit about this last time, but when we talk about suppressing those emotions or not allowing emotions happen that are tied to our neediness, right? Is that a pride thing? Is that what is that? Why? Because well, I'm not sad. I'm not, I've got lots of men in my life that I'm not sad. I'm not hurt. No, I'm not.
Yeah.
And it's an immediate, like, you can literally see the, like, whoa, I'm not going to allow that to affect me.
Right.
Even though it's already there.
Yeah. Well, anger manifests itself in a couple different ways. In depression, which is when you're denying the anger, or pride, to your point, when you're saying, oh, that didn't really hurt me. Oh, I don't really need that, right? That's a form of pride. So I think, to answer your question, I think there is an aspect of anger playing out, but I also think it's an aspect of shame, because we don't want to embrace our own humanity. That is a dynamic of healthy shame. There's two aspects of shame. You have toxic shame, which is essentially attacking your worth and value as a human being created in the image and likeness of God. And then there's healthy shame, which is recognizing that I have limitations. I can't do everything. I need help from other people. And it's this resistance to our own neediness that, if we're not careful, can turn into contempt for that neediness. And if I have contempt for my neediness, or if I am disconnected from my emotions, just think about how that's going to play out in my marriage or in relationships with my coworkers or employees. And so if you're shut down to your emotions, you can't be open to the emotions of others. It just doesn't work that way.
Okay, so let's get practical then. What does it look like? What does it look like processing my emotions?
Yeah. Okay, so let's just go into
Get real layman's terms here, Ken. We're not all that smart. Come on.
So let's just talk about the 8 core emotions, and let's just, for argument's sake, we have some people say, well, there's got to be more than 8 core emotions, right? And yes, of course, there's a whole gamut of emotions, but we're talking about the core. We're talking about the source, if you will, and it's not unlike we have 3 primary colors. And from those 3 primary colors, we have all these other colors to choose from, or 7 musical notes, right? You're a worship guy, so you're a music guy. From those 7 musical notes, we can write symphonies. So why would it be a problem for God to give us 8 core emotions? So just for argument's sake, let's just say Chip is right. Here's what the 8 core emotions are: anger, fear, hurt, sadness, loneliness, fear, guilt, shame, and glad is the last one. I added one. Did I add 9?
You added one.
Okay, so let's try that again. Anger, fear, hurt, sadness, loneliness, guilt, shame, glad.
Yep.
Those are the 8.
Yep.
Now, probably what you're thinking is, well, there's only one positive emotion there. Why is glad the only positive emotion? Well, the truth is there's gifts in each of those emotions. So, for example, anger, the gift of anger is it reveals what matters to you. The gift of sadness reveals how something meant something to you, right? You go to a funeral and you're crying at the loss of a friend or a loved one because they mattered to you. They made a difference in your life. And so there's gifts in each of these core emotions.
Yep.
But the way that we go about this is as we have an experience, and let's say it's a painful life experience. I'll just give you an example. So my parents divorced when I was 5 years old. And so as a 5-year-old little boy, I had a very limited capacity to process what was happening in my family because I'm 5. So, but the emotions associated that could be, of those 8, could be fear, could be shame. Well, I wasn't a good enough little boy for mom and dad to stay together. Could be sadness, certainly.
Yeah.
Could be hurt, right? So of the 8, you're talking about 4 of those core emotions. So if I align those 4 core emotions to that experience, now I'm actually walking in the truth and reality of what was going on inside of me during that experience. Now you might say, well, Ken, you're 5. How can you know what was going on in you? Well, and that's true. We have a growing capacity from about 2 years forward to actually remember events in our lives that we have specific memories tied to. But I have a grandson who's just turning 7, who is very much like me, very sensitive, very aware of his environment. And I can imagine how Gideon would experience his mom and dad getting a divorce. So even if I can't get in touch with those emotions, I can get in touch with how this, and then I can just extrapolate and go, well, why would it be any different for me? And so one of the things that I've been doing as a practice, as I'm going through my day, if something comes up that's distressing, I will be paying attention to what are the core emotions I'm experiencing right now. Am I feeling hurt, sad, lonely, angry? And then if I'm not able to actually deal with it or process it in the moment, I can come back to it later and go, okay, so what was I feeling hurt about? What was I feeling angry about? What is it that mattered to me in that situation that wasn't happening? And so it allows us to process those painful life experiences. Typically what we do instead is we just blow it off. That didn't really, why am I being such a baby about that? My wife, Susan, she said something, and usually it's the other way around, but let's just say for argument's sake, she says something that hurts my feelings. It's like, dude, don't be such a wuss. Why are you letting that hurt your feelings? Just put on your big boy pants and get on with it. That's how we typically address it. I'm trying to resist that and then actually allow myself to go, okay, that hurt. Well, why did that hurt? What was hurtful about that? Well, that she would say that to me, that she, in that moment didn't care enough about how I might have felt, And so now I'm thinking, oh, I also feel sad about that. And you know what? Dang it, I'm feeling angry too. So
at what point in life were you able to start doing that?
Oh, this is recent. This is like within the last year.
Yeah. So the thing that it makes me think about a lot is how hard it is. It's hard to be honest with other people, right? It's hard to be honest all the time at work or with your spouse or with your children or whatever. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, maybe a white lie here or what. But how hard is it to be honest with yourself?
Yeah.
I think that's the hardest version of honesty there is.
Well, because I think to have these emotions, it triggers a toxic shame response that there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
You're less than.
Yeah.
And Dana, I got to be honest with you. That's all. Those are just lies and distortions that come directly from the pit of hell.
But there is a bit of truth in that where you think about it and you go, there's a little bit of that shame where you're like, yeah, I'm not enough. And it's like, yeah, you're not enough. And it's okay. And like, there's part of me right now is being okay with that. Where
it's okay as long as you're attributing it to, I have limitations.
Sure.
As opposed to there's something wrong with me that I'm not enough in this situation.
Well, and we've talked a lot about that at length, you and I personally, of going back through that and going, we sat down and one of the first things I said to you, Dana, what do you want to get out of these conversations that we have? And I looked at you and I said, I want to like myself.
Yeah.
I mean, what is that? Like, just That's a brutal thing to sit down and even say, to be honest with you. Like, but that was the most honest I could get to myself and to you was, man, I want to find out why on earth God made me. What was the purpose that he made me for? You know what I mean? And that's what I find is real hard to get to, even at 42 daily, is, come on, Dana, just be honest with yourself. It's okay. You're not enough, and that's okay.
Right.
You're okay with that.
You have limitations.
You have limitations.
Dana, how can you like yourself if you don't know yourself?
Yeah.
You can't like something you don't know. And so, again, if we're ignorant to actually what's going on in our hearts, if we're clueless about our emotions, what is there to like? It doesn't even register. And, let's just say talk for a second, because we're losing some of the guys here and talking about liking ourselves. It's like, where's that biblically? Show me where that is in Scripture. Think about the great commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And love your neighbor as you love who?
Yeah.
As you love yourself. When is the last time you heard a sermon on how to love yourself well? Now, I'm not talking about some humanistic, psychobabical, we just made up a new word, psychobabical dynamic. I'm talking about seeing ourselves through God's eyes with value and worth that he has given to us, demonstrated most clearly by Jesus' willingness to go to the cross and die for us.
Well, and I think even coming back to your point of like, at least, I praise you for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Like, Psalm 139, where David talks about that. It's like, do I praise him? Do I feel like I'm fearfully and wonderfully made? Do I believe that about myself? And that is really what I'm getting at. It's not about this whole like new age thinking of, everything's okay, everything's permissible, yada, yada, yada. It was like, no, I've been doing is I will put my hand up against that closet door and go, no, I will not deal with emotions yet. I'm an emotional dude. And I refuse to accept that because I was like, well, good is emotion. It's not going to do anything for me. I'm a guy. Suck it in and toughen up, blah, 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 blah. Well, what that does is that's a hindrance to growth.
Yes.
Is it stops my growth because it's one part of how God made me that I refuse to acknowledge.
Right. Well, and it's not only that you refuse to acknowledge it, there's that other aspect of having contempt for it.
Ooh.
And I use that word on purpose because contempt is an intense word. Dana, let's go back and talk about something you just said, because I've heard this a lot of times. People will say, why do I need to process my emotions? Why do I need to go back to the past and deal with this? What good is it? I can't change it.
That's right.
So what good is it to do all of this? People say that out of an ignorance, and I don't say that with any kind of contempt, of how the brain works. Because every time you process an experience, you are rewriting that script for that memory. That is why we need each other. Because when I'm sharing an experience I had with you that I'm embarrassed to share with you, it triggers a shameful response in me. I feel like a loser or less than as a man. And you listening going, dude, that had to be terrible. I can't even imagine how hurtful that would have been. As you validate that, it is rewiring and rewriting that experience in my brain in a different way. Now, it doesn't just take one time for that, right? That's why having friendships where we can be real and honest with each other on a regular basis. Every time that I share this with you and you show me safe feedback, meaning that you're not judging me, you're not criticizing me, rejecting me for it, right? Making me feel less than, you're validating, you're seeing it, you're affirming it. That changes it in my brain. And so it absolutely does make a difference. Now, it's true you can't go back and change the situation, but you can change how you perceive that situation.
It's interesting. There's a lot of very famous, well-known pastors, podcasters, and they all want, not all, but some of them want to harp on, the newest thing now is toxic empathy. Yeah. I'm like, what are you so afraid of? that we could at least just share in each other's burdens.
Yeah.
Like I don't get that.
Well, yeah, a friend of mine, Dr. Bill Gaultier, he's a psychologist. He and his wife lead an organization called Soul Shepherding. And he recently wrote an article on that whole dynamic of how, empathy is being challenged from a biblical standpoint. And I think it was him who said that the greatest illustration of empathy is the incarnation.
Mm.
Because empathy essentially is putting yourself in that other person's shoes. When God became flesh and dwelt among us, he put himself in our shoes.
He literally got in the pit with us.
Yes, not because he didn't get it, but because we would know that he gets it.
Ooh, there's not a better, I've never heard that example. That's phenomenal.
So, we could give a lot of other biblical examples for empathy, but I think again, there is this mindset, even in Christian masculinity, that emotion is somehow inferior and is ungodly. And it's honestly, I think it's a deception. I think it's a lie from the enemy to keep these emotions suppressed and then to suppress them in other people. And that produces a toxicity in our system that God did not design us to live with. Unresolved emotion also triggers depending on what's going on, is that fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode. So it actually puts you in a state of stress. Well, when you're in a state of stress, your brain is releasing adrenaline and cortisol into your bloodstream. It's just, you can't control it. It's just how God designed us to work. To have a slow drip of that in your system long term is very damaging. And so that's one of the things that trauma does, is it gets our amygdala, which is our alarm center, it gets it stuck in danger, danger, danger mode.
Yeah.
And that creates a stress response that then is also going to make us irritable. It's going to drain our energy. Yeah, it's going to have all kinds of other physiological and emotional, psychological, and spiritual consequences.
It's interesting. So we probably have some guys watching this. They're like, yeah, well, what do I do? Who's going to talk to me about this? I think part of the practicality is there is a practical side to emotions, and being able to process those. They're not alone, definitely not alone. And it's like, well, I'm not going to go see a counselor. Well, I'm not going to go, for me, it wasn't all about finding a counselor. Counseling is wonderful in its own right, in its right moments and other things. But I think the most healing for me was finding other men that were willing to have those conversations. And it's not always the right time. And if you're with a group of guys and they're golfing or whatever, there's not always a great spot. But what are some practical ways that men can start processing these emotions?
Yeah. Well, so the men that are married, one of the things that I have found is that when you both have the same language of these 8 core emotions, it gives you a capacity to connect in a way that you didn't have otherwise. So instead of, asking your wife, well, what's wrong with you? Why are you so upset? To just say, honey, you seem angry. Or are you feeling hurt or sad? That opens up a whole different conversation. So some of this is just having the language for it. Finding a safe person is more difficult, for sure. But one of the ways that you could go about it is when just in your normal friendships to slowly look for opportunities to engage with them around your new learning of these 8 core emotions. So, I'd really recommend Chip's book, because in his book, The Voice of the Heart, he goes through all 8 core emotions and he gives you all the things that you really need to understand what's going on there. And when you have that information, these are like 8 tools now in your tool belt that you can bring to any relationship as a way of connecting and helping people feel seen. Dan Siegel he teaches at UCLA. He's a big neuroscience guy. And he summarizes our 4 needs as the need to be seen, soothed, safe, and secure. Those 4 needs are God instilled. You can't choose to have them or not have them. You have them. And, whether you're a Green Beret Army Ranger or, a high school teacher, you have those 8 core needs, or those 4 core needs. And those are like a womb to the tomb thing. Those, you never outgrow those. So when you're with a buddy and you guys are talking about the game, or, you're hanging out at the campfire after a hunting trip, and he says, my wife and I are having some struggles. That's an opportunity for you to lean in and say, man, that sounds like it's really hard. It sounds like you feel really sad about that. And as you connect with him on that, then he'll go, yeah, I am. And you're like, tell me about that.
And here's the thing about that's the smooth conversation of what happens. Here's what I would encourage many men not to do. Man, I got a great Bible verse that'll fix everything.
For sure.
I can fix this. We're fixers. That is how God does it. We are fixers. Make it better, make it right, and fix it. What we are talking about here with emotional pain, maybe some emotional trauma, whatever that is, the conversation starts by getting in the pit with each other and hanging out there, not tossing a rope down in there and going, hey man, pull yourself up. Like, there are some guardrails here of when you do read that book, when you read Chip Dodd's book, you have to be careful because it does put tools in your toolbox to be able to use. It also kind of puts a sword in there too. And you've got to be careful with that I have found when I first started my journey, it was like, hey, let me go home and vomit all this stuff all over my wife, who was not ready to receive any of that.
Yeah.
And it fell on deaf ears. I'm reminded of this one video that was online, and it kind of made its rounds, but it was kind of a guy having a sentimental moment about something in life. I don't remember what it was. And his wife, she kind of chirps him, she kind of like, you're upset. You're sad about get over it. Come on, we got to go. And she breezes by the moment. You talk about Susan, or I can talk about Julie, where yes, our wives have done the work and put the work in. For guys that are starting this journey, I would say, from the layman's terms, be so careful as you venture into this. If your wife has not done that work, she may not have the tools to know how to respond yet.
No.
And it may scare her.
For sure. But if you use the tools on yourself in conversation with her, you come home from work and she's like, how was your day at work today? He's like, man, I had a really hard day. Really? Tell me about it. Well, I had this deal that I'd worked really hard on, and it just completely fell through. Wow. It's like, and man, I'm feeling really sad about that. So when you're taking ownership of your own emotions, you are actually modeling for her and even leading her in that direction. Most of the guys that I start coaching, Dana, their wives aren't on the same page.
Yeah.
And in that regard. And so I just help them to say, guys, you need to become aware of what's going on in your heart, and then be willing to share it with her.
Well, I also think there's part of that learning process of showing that type of vulnerability with other friends or your spouse. You're going to learn along the way the people that are ready to have those conversations and the people that aren't.
Right.
It's very clear when you start those conversations, and sometimes the spouse isn't ready to do that. Sometimes the spouse is the one that hurts you in the end because, get over it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, whoa. And then we build a wall.
And one of the reasons why a spouse or a friend will shut that down is because when you start sharing what's going on with you, it triggers that in them.
Yeah.
There's neurons called mirror neurons. So when you are crying or feeling sad, my mirror neurons are kicking in, and I'm feeling that sadness or the hurt or the anger. And so if I am shut down to my emotions, and if I am unwilling and have contempt for them, you start sharing with me, those emotions want to start coming up. I'm like, oh, no. I'm going to shut those down real quick.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to put the kibosh on you so that you don't either.
Yep. 100%. Well, what are some practical takeaways here that we can use? Because it's one thing to say it. And I would say that learning about our emotions is definitely something that I would say the way I learned the best in doing Chip Dodd's book was finding a group of guys that would do it together.
Yeah.
Find somebody that knows a little bit about it that will lead you. And I personally found that having a group of 5, sometimes 6, but that's probably tops in terms of guys for time to be able to share. That was how I started sort of learning, and out of that formed a few really close friends that were like, hey, we kind of speaking the same language now, or, I can have a phone call or a moment and just be like, man, this is a tough week. Julie and I aren't getting together. We're not on the same page, and share my frustration. But what are some practical ways guys can start that journey?
Well, I think to start slow, I think is a big deal. I also think to recognize that God has placed the desire to be known in the human heart. That has been wounded for most people. That is something that many people have just kind of stuck in a vault so that it doesn't get hurt or squashed. But when you start inviting somebody into a conversation, again, slowly, and this may be over a course of weeks where you are just asking some probing questions, things like, hey, how you really doing? Or how are things going? And when you communicate a sincere desire to know, they'll respond to that. Now, to your point, there's going to be some guys that are just like, ain't going there.
Yep.
Well, you can't drag them there. So you just need to recognize, hey, I can still be friends with this guy, but he's not going to be a guy that I'm going to invite into, some kind of a study or a conversation that's going to go there. We are very guarded. Our wounded parts are very guarded. And the more angry a person is often an indication of how wounded that person is. And the anger is just to keep you away so that you can't hurt me. And so that's why a lot of people are prickly or irritable or grouchy or whatever. It's not just being tired or just having a bad day. That can be true. But very often it's, I'm going to just keep you at arm's length so you can't hurt me. And a growing self-awareness of those dynamics, I think, is really helpful. Listening to podcasts like this, right? Getting Chip's book. There's lots of other good resources out there that provide a biblical theological foundation for this. Because I think one of the reasons why people are resistant to, Christian men are resistant to this, is because they don't know where to find this in Scripture. Well, there's a whole book in the Bible, Old Testament, called Lamentations, which is all about lament. Over and over again in the Psalms, David is lamenting. He's sharing his heart. There's lots of opportunity for us to see this in Scripture.
I also think that the vulnerability side of your emotions is not something that's taught. And it's not because it's not teachable, but it's because it's really how it's experienced. It's not whether or not can you get up on a pulpit and preach about being vulnerable? Sure. Does that get people to be vulnerable? Not at all.
Yeah.
They don't become that because they need to be around it. They need to. It's a modeled thing. It's not a taught
If people
thing.
don't feel safe, they're not going to share.
Not a chance.
Safety is the key. And safety is based on trust, and trust takes time.
Yep.
A relationship of trust gives you the opportunity to explore and probe more deeply into what that person is going through. Because it's not that you've earned the right to do that, but you've proven that you're a safe person for them and that they can be honest and real with what's really going on, because you're not going to squash them. We want to be known, Dana. God wired that into us. This need for intimacy, relational intimacy, it's built into our DNA as human beings. Again, it's an expression of the image and likeness of God. These aren't things that are weak theologically or signs of weakness as to what it means to be a man or a godly man. It's actually about walking in the light. It's about living with integrity, right? What's going on inside of me is equal to what's going on outside of me, right? There's that integrity. Jesus experienced emotion. God the Father experiences emotion. We can post in the show notes. I've put together some different charts that kind of go through and show God's emotions in the Old Testament, Jesus' emotions in the New Testament. I think we actually went through some of those at the marriage intensive that we did together a while back. And that's just helpful to go, okay, that helps me then not be, and fear may be too strong a word, but feeling like it's not a biblical thing to do. It's an absolutely biblical thing to do. And it's not some psychological psychobabble stuff, that this is robustly biblical. It's based upon the character and nature of God. It's how he created us. And so for us to just ignore it and blow it off, I honestly just don't think that's an option. To live in denial, to allow the negative consequences of suppressing emotion, of not being able to connect with others in an authentic and intimate way because I'm afraid of my own emotion. That's just not okay. It's funny, at Trinity Ranch in Montana, which is these 5-day intensives that we do at a 2,000-acre ranch, and Dana's been there and some of our other mutual friends. And I was speaking one morning on this topic, and I had 3 Army Ranger Green Berets in the room. And one of the guys, he was sitting right over across from me, big dude. And these guys are just scary. I'm just saying, right? They could kill you 100 different ways before you hit the ground and you wouldn't even know it. And afterward, he said, "Hey, Ken, can I talk to you for a second?" I'm like, "Oh, man." So I go walking over and he's like, I said, "Sure, what's up?" And he's like, "Yeah, I don't do emotion." I'm like, "Okay." I said, "Hey, you have a 12-year-old daughter, don't you?" Because I knew a little bit of his story. And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Tell me about her." And his face just lit up. "Oh my gosh, I am so proud of this girl." And he just gushed for like 10 minutes. And I looked at him and I said, "So you don't do emotion?" And he's just like, he doesn't want to do emotion that makes him feel vulnerable.
That's right.
Because he has had to learn how to survive by shutting those things off.
Yeah, because vulnerability is dangerous.
It is dangerous.
Yep.
I see that in first responders. I see that in firefighters, police officers, of course, military. They do a good job at training you to compartmentalize so that when you're in the heat of the situation, you don't lose it. Because if you do, you're going to get killed or other people are going to die or something bad's going to happen.
And what professions have an extremely high suicide rate?
Yeah, exactly. And it's all of this shut down emotion. I teach in a graduate program in trauma and neuroscience, and we're right in the middle of classes right now. And one of the students in my cohort is she's a former military police who has quite a trauma story. And in my interaction with her, one of the things that I've said is, I said, I'm glad that the military is doing a better job at helping identify PTSD and processing through that. I said, but my experience with veterans is that, while the military proper is addressing these things much better, it's in the barracks, it's still a whole nother thing. You're just a puss, suck it up. You got to be tough.
Well, when you walk into life or death situations, you don't care about emotions.
Right.
That doesn't matter at the time, right? So if they see you as having emotion, they see you as dangerous.
Yes, exactly.
You're dangerous to their livelihood.
Yeah. So there's a time and a place for this,
That's
for
right.
sure.
Yep.
But what the military especially doesn't do a good job, in my opinion, of, they're doing a better job. But what they don't do as good a job in is training you how to come back and live like a human being when you've had to shut those parts of yourself off in order to survive and protect other people.
Yep.
And sadly, that's what contributes to the high suicide rate of a lot of our veterans, as well as police officers and firefighters, because just of the trauma that they are exposed to by seeing people suffer and die. I was sitting with a firefighter a few years ago, and he was telling me about this unbelievably horrific story where they were in a house was on fire, and the kids were upstairs and they couldn't get to the kids because the staircase and everything, and they couldn't get through a window because everything was just too on fire. And so he had to hear those kids.
Oh, no.
Can you imagine that? So what do you do with that? Well, you got to work through the anger, the fear, the sadness, you got to work through that stuff.
And there's a time, two things can be true at the same time. A firefighter can be a soldier, a firefighter, a police, an EMT. They can be a rock in the moment.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. Shut your emotion off for that moment. You need to, that is survival, 100%. But that doesn't mean that you all of a sudden become an island.
No.
To deal with it. It doesn't work that way.
Well, and the hard thing too, a lot of times when we have a traumatic experience, we don't believe that anybody else really gets it.
Yeah.
And that's where peer groups really are helpful. Because when you're sitting with, from a soldier standpoint, when you're sitting with a group of soldiers that know what you've been through because they've been through it, there's something that happens there that's really healing and really helpful, especially if it's led by a skilled facilitator.
Yep.
It's really important. So, just to kind of wrap this up, emotion is something that God has given us, and to deny those, to suppress them, to cut ourselves off from them is limiting an aspect of our humanity that God gave us. And so if he gave them to us, he must have given them to us for a reason. And quite frankly, one of the things that Chip has taught me is that God gave us emotions. God gave us these 8 core emotions in order to live wholeheartedly in a harsh world. Because when you know that you have the capacity to process hurt and sadness, you don't have to seal yourself off or try to protect yourself from being hurt. So the idea is you actually let the force field down and you learn to live life undefended. And you might say, well, why would I do that? Because then I'm opening myself to getting hurt. Yeah, you are. But you also are equipped to process that hurt if and when it happens. If you choose to just silo it and lock it away, it's going to have all kinds of devastating effects on your relationships and on your own health. So it really, this is something that we need to talk more about, and it's something that we need to have a much more robust understanding of and theology for.
Yeah. No, that's really good. That's awesome. Well, we will, I think, put it away there, but this is heavy at some points, but also needed. And it's so needed for men. And guys, if you're listening, we just invite you, just dip your toe in the water. I know you may not believe everything we're saying. Maybe you don't trust everything we're saying. Just dip your toe in the water and see what God does, and see the doors that he opens for you with other men, and maybe opportunity to be able to share that emotion, to be able to share that pain and walk through vulnerability. But yeah, thanks again for listening. This is the Men Talking Podcast, and we'll catch you soon.